So we're sitting on the driveway. The cops were not speaking to us at all. I don't even think they were looking at us.
None of the cops would talk to us. And we were like, should we ask them a question? Like, what the fuck just happened?
The documentary opens like many horror films do, with soothing piano music and sketches of a peaceful, idyllic setting, which is exactly what Moscow, Idaho is, more so than many places in America. I had never even heard of Moscow, Idaho until this case, and I actually traveled there, which is a long way to go when you're in South Africa, because you've really got to go right across America, and it's the northwest of America. And I did that while I was covering the murder trial of Lori Vallow, which is just down the road from Moscow, Idaho, in Boise, Idaho. My impression was that it was a delightful little enclave, a hidden gem, a safe place ensconced in nature. There's quite a lot of mountains and rivers around there where college dreams have a canvas to come true. It was a place I thought I might have liked to have studied if it wasn't so far north. In this analysis, we're going to gloss over the 4-part series and give it a broad overview. If you find my analysis worthwhile and want me to dig deeper into the episodes, please do hit the thanks button and let me know in the comments. If you don't want to miss those episodes, you might want to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Right, so let's deal with 6 shockers from the One Night in Idaho documentary. Number 1, Maddies' mother.
Imagination. Why they would hurt these children. Why they would hurt my child.
Within the first 2 minutes of episode 1, we see a pretty blonde woman who turns out to be one of the most important voices we need to hear when it comes to this case. That's Maddies' mother, Karen Laramie. It's through her that I feel one gets a sense of the real pain of this crime, not the loud attention-seeking anger, but the quiet anguish of a mother who has lost her beautiful daughter forever.
As we just even parked for the orientation, just waiting in line, like moms were hugging their daughters, and I had to look away because every time I saw that, I just wanted to ugly cry. She was so excited. And I'm just trying to keep it together.
The documentary essentially opens by introducing Maddies' mother and taking us through photos of Maddie as a baby, an infant, a toddler, a small girl, and then making friends with Kaylee as a young girl. And obviously the two would become close friends, lifelong friends, lying side by side in life and tragically in death. And this introduction naturally humanizes one of the victims, but also leads to the introduction of the second of the 4 victims, Kaylee Gonzalez. And so each in turn of these 4 are identified and introduced to us in a way that is really necessary. Because in a way, Kohberger has sort of dominated the story. And in a sense, we sort of forget who each of these individuals were. Each death in this case is a tragedy, and the fact that they're 4, in a sense, almost diminishes each one's story when it really shouldn't. Anyway, that brings us to number 2, trauma exposed.
Yeah. Hunter had enough courage to tell them to call the police for not a real reason. He worded it very nicely. He said, tell them there's an unconscious person.
That's Emily Allen. With tears streaming down her face, she reveals something I think the true crime community can learn from, which is giving the dead a little dignity. If there is a grisly scene, of someone you know, what should you do? Should you look away, or should you sit there in the blood and obsess and blame and rage and drink it all in? Hunter Johnson also reveals a touching maturity by saying to those he has shepherded out, call the police, there's an unconscious person here. And as a result, effectively he's almost the only person out of everyone who actually sees the scene as it actually was in terms of the survivors.
When I was going up the stairs, Hunter Johnson was already in the house. We were just a bit behind.
As soon as I stepped in the house, I was like, oh, something is so not right. Like, you could feel it almost. With the address, I was like, 1122 King Road. She was like, well, what happened? I was like, I don't know. And then I think that's when Hunter was like, he just like looked at me and he was like shaking his head. He was like, they didn't have a pulse. And I mean, even when he said they had no pulse, I still was like, oh, the paramedics are gonna come and like revive them.
And that shows you that Hunter, in his own quiet way, actually made sure that he kind of did attend to the victims in some way. And I do think social media can take a few leaves out of this book in terms of decorum from these 20-somethings in how to deal with a tragedy with the appropriate gravitas. Yes, care about the victims, but try to retain your humanity and human decency while you're at it. I also think Hunter can be credited with preventing the crime scene from being contaminated because he prevented others from entering that scene. Then number 3, Facebook mods are the main narrators.
Lena and I have a passion for true crime. We have multiple pages that focus on crimes that people are looking to solve, but the biggest and most well-known is the University of Idaho murders. There was talk back then like, oh, I bet the killer is on this page. There's 220,000 of us.
So this review is not only my personal response to the documentary, but also my response, obviously, as a creator on YouTube that is covering this case and someone who initially paid a lot of attention to this case. And I have to say, I learned a few lessons on my journey, when I specifically went by myself, hired a car and went to Moscow and came back. So when I watched this documentary, I was kind of surprised to see a couple of Facebook mods were chosen in a sense as the face of social media, the sensible face of social media, admittedly in a landscape that is filled with many disreputable chances. And I thought they did quite a good job. They basically only come into the story, I think, in episode 3. So if you want to see what they say about it, it's around about half an hour into episode 3. As they say, they've covered other high-profile cases. In the documentary, it shows I think a cover image or a background image of Madeleine McCann with a woman who claims to be Madeleine McCann. I think if you're going to show that, I think it reveals to some extent your ignorance about the Madeleine McCann case. I'm simply commenting on this as someone who's written 5 books on the Madeleine McCann case, and I've also traveled to Pride Delusion. I would say that my expertise in the Madeleine McCann case is fairly clear. Anyway, that's the Madeleine McCann case. We're dealing with the Idaho 4 case. And I do think social media does have there's a narrative surrounding how social media dealt with the Idaho 4 case. And some may remember the YouTuber that claimed that he had actual audio of the victim screaming. I'm not sure if Shanley Painter was referring to this, but she was on the scene at the time. I actually met her when she was also covering the Laurie Vallow case in Idaho, and she debunked that claim, even though it went viral. And that happened a lot. False claims going viral. It's one of my big bugbears in true crime.
Now, I know, Chanley, there was also a viral post going around about some audio from the crime scene on the night of those murders. What do we know about that?
That's right. If anyone has been following this case closely, especially online and social media, TikTok, Facebook, you probably noticed a viral post, multiple viral posts regarding alleged audio. Remember? And so being on the ground, I spoke with the neighbors here. Paul's going to pan over here how close this home is, this blue home that we've seen next to the crime scene, where that surveillance video would be. I caught the people living there walking out earlier, and they have debunked that audio. It is not the audio from that surveillance video.
Now, I remember one of the creators who was responsible for that, he disappeared for a while. People forgot, but he's back to his opportunism like it never happened. Do you remember the TikToker who claimed a professor committed the crimes. And I think that person was sued for slander. In terms of the value a Facebook group offered a documentary, besides lending its audience clout, 250,000 people, I wouldn't really know about that. I used to cover Facebook as an important dimension of social media in true crime, especially in the early days when I was writing books. I don't really do that anymore. And though I was aware of this group, I don't remember if I ever really went there or participated. But something that they did highlight is Papa Roger. You heard them say in the clip that people speculated, I wonder whether the murderer is participating on this page. Well, it turned out that he was. And that brings us to number 4, Papa Roger. Now, one aspect the Facebook group did highlight was an account by Papa Roger, who does seem to turn out could likely have been Koberger himself. It's not too often that social media actually contributes anything tangible or anything useful, but it seems the Papa Roger aspect may have actually been discussed as part of Brian's otherwise wafer-thin social media fingerprints. The fact that Koberger impersonated someone else, not just that, but someone that looks like a military person, kind of makes sense because he was infatuated with military themes. But it's also interesting that he was hiding behind a mask. Also tells you how weak he was, even in that sense, how little agency he had on social media as well. Now, I think he started this social media profile in November 2022, in other words, for the explicit purpose to skulk around this Facebook group. And I think if you don't think Brian Koberger stalked the residents, the fact that he was stalking this Facebook group, I think tells you quite a lot. Now, for me, though, Facebook wasn't really the social media platform of choice for any of the victims. If I was making a documentary, I don't think I would have chosen Facebook. So why focus on it? I think a far more interesting conversation could have taken place around Instagram, assuming, of course, the friends of the 4 were cleared to talk about that. Now, the gag order was actually lifted earlier yesterday, so perhaps we will find out about the social media side in more detail in due course. For my part, while this was happening in real time, I actually dismissed the Papa Roger stuff. As far as I knew, some of it was taking place on Reddit, and I had questions about its credibility. I thought that it could be moderators trying to attract an audience cynically, dishonestly, because you were having a lot of that kind of thing taking place, people doing anything, just desperate to draw audiences to their information, even if it was false, at a time when there was very little information coming out. And so, although I thought there was some substance to what they were saying, I thought until it's definitive, I'm not really going to stray in that area. I'll rather concentrate on what I know or what I believe to be more likely to be true. But even if that wasn't the case, I'm not sure how much comes out of those interactions, besides the obvious fact that Koberger was interested in what people thought. Obviously he was, and was interested in what they knew and suspected about his crime. The Facebook mods are clearly moved by the fact that a killer had infiltrated their page, and I kind of know what that feels like. I actually covered a case of a triple axe murderer in Cape Town. I attended that trial. I wrote 5 books about it, and I was told afterwards that him and his girlfriend read my account of the case while the trial was underway, read my book about it, and the ex-murderer, who was later convicted, actually physically bumped into me in court on, I think it was day 1 of his testimony, and he mouthed some of the words in my first book back to me. And I can't say I was complimented that he'd read it. Instead, it actually made my skin crawl. So it seems like something a little bit like that happened with these Facebook moderators. That brings us to another element in social media, number 5, YouTuber vilified. Now, if you want to see who that is, it's at around the half-hour mark of episode 2. One specific YouTuber out of a whole host is shown skulking around Moscow. I know what that feels like because I was skulking around Moscow, but I didn't do it the way that he was. I was very discreet. I was also not trying to insert myself into the story. And I've actually felt very uncomfortable. I felt this is the territory, the home of these students, and I didn't feel very comfortable being there. And you will notice I'm not going to disclose the identity of the YouTuber or even show him as he's shown in episode 2 of One Night in Idaho. I do think it's important that documentaries in the future name and shame and identify some of those in social media who are really the worst offenders, who take a gratuitous interest in the most grisly crimes and try to profit from it, and who don't really care about what they're doing as long as they get rewarded handsomely for it. And do they really care about justice? Or do they care more about getting a bite of the cherry? A big conversation surrounding this case, especially, is how social media seems to consider people, even young people, fair game to turn into suspects. And this reflects a sick, sadistic, and twisted aspect, a psychopathic aspect that in a sense overshadows this case. You hear all of these people talking about psychopathic Brian Koberger, but this targeting of the survivors is in a sense even worse. You know, it's preying, it's being predators onto innocent victims, and I don't really care because I want to have that conversation. It's disgusting. And what it reveals is that Koberger isn't the only evil out there. There's evil amongst us, and many endorse and cheerlead that evil. Are you one of them? One more thing I want to say about this individual. I remember when it was announced that the suspect had been arrested, but before Koberger had been identified, this particular individual, it's the one that was highlighted in this documentary, tweeted breaking news, providing the exclusive scoop of a name and a photo of someone whom he declared to be the Idaho 4 killer. Well, guess what? It wasn't Koberger. We saw a lot of this kind of viral nonsense taking over social media. Those sorts of posts go viral, even though they are fake, and yet you see no accountability for them. When it later turns out it's not fake, who cares? Let's go on to the next shocker, right? And that then brings us to number 6, the student's resilience.
This is my spare bedroom. This window faces 1122 King Road. They still have the same caution tape up 368 days later.
Now, I must say, when I see that footage, that is the visual I got of the funhouse when I was there. It was boarded up. It had those fences around it. It was this sort of quite miserable, wintry sort of setup. And it's certainly quite moving to see that perspective from someone's home, someone who's actually living there. And that's literally the sense that I got when I went there, is that this is where young people are trying to start their lives. And do you really want to be focusing and drawing your attention to death and destruction as though that is what life's all about? Because it's not. Do you want to invade their lives and poison it with darkness and fear and distrust and all of that negativity? So something that was actually good to see throughout this documentary was the maturity, the intelligence, that sort of sparkling spirit, in spite of the grief and it was the resilience. You know, despite the Stephen King horror show that erupted around them, they nevertheless were able to sort of hold it together, I thought, quite well. And I'm pretty sure the university spoke to their own people and said, we're not going to talk about this. Don't talk to the media. It's just interesting that the media didn't seem to take the hint. And I do think there is a very authentic moment near the end where Emily says she thinks Koberger shouldn't be talked about because he's a loser.
So many people talk about Brian Koberger. I think he's a loser that shouldn't get talked about at all.
I don't disagree with her, and I certainly agree with her in terms of her context. If I was her parent or friend, I would make the same recommendation. But I also think that is why Koberger did what he did. Although her contempt for him is justified after he did what he did, I also think he felt that same contempt before he did what he did. And I think that is food for thought. People really didn't like him, and so he took his revenge. And now they really don't like him after he did what he did, but they never liked him to begin with. What's up with that? What's up with being antisocial and unfriendly to people around you? But I think that is part of life. It's part of the pecking order in schools. I just think one's got to be aware that there are some people that are suffering. Not all of them become killers, but some people are deeply unhappy because they're being deeply alienated at the same time that some people are having the time of their lives. Is it that hard to reach out to some of those people? Anyway, what has changed since this crime happened, except that more people now know about Brian Koberger, whereas in the past he was invisible? The two surviving roommates from the Idaho quadruple homicide, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, were not part of the documentary, but the documentary did highlight the unacceptable accusations against them on social media, all the mudslinging and stone throwing. If you were part of that, either as a creator or as a viewer, I hope you feel ashamed of yourself, because you should. I'm not going to take it further than that, except to note, very interesting is to compare this case to the Amanda Knox case. Amanda Knox presents herself as an innocent survivor, but someone who sort of laughed through a highly traumatic event and seems to still be laughing. And she can't seem to get enough of telling her story, being on the camera, writing books, doing interviews. Do Dylan and Bethany seem to you a lot like Amanda Knox? And does Knox seem a lot like them? Are their stories really the same?
Food for thought.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like me to continue my analysis of this documentary, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.